physical realm, if you want to get healthy, you might be pretty healthy yourself, but there's always benefits to getting a coach, and there's always ways to continue to improve. Um, so yeah.
And I think this is kind of an obvious thing to say, but I'm hoping I'm taking a gamble that you can at least confirm some of what I'm saying here. There's no stigma attached to this. There's no stigma in saying I need some help. I don't know if you guys have read. Tell me if you're in here, if you've actually heard of or read the book Black Pain by Terry Williams. Terry Williams is a lady that I know her pretty well, and I like her a lot. And she wrote a book about how many Black women in particular are going through life depressed, like it literally like the Walking Dead, because we've got this whole image to maintain of the strong Black woman, right? Which means you're not supposed to feel pain, you're not supposed to acknowledge your pain, etc. And I personally happen to be a guy who doesn't think there's anything wrong with being strong. Like my grandmother she was a prototypical strong Black woman, went through hell and back barefoot, and just was act like it wasn't nothing, right? Like, and that's kind of how our people are built. But we have to find a way to I imagine cope with that in a healthier way, at least acknowledge that, and we can still be strong. Like I think strength is always a good thing, but it has to be healthy strong. It can't be sort of unhealthy strong. Like the reason I'm so strong is because I've been through so much stuff physically and emotionally and otherwise that I'm numb to pain now because the hell has been so torturous on me. That's not healthy strength. To me, healthy strength is when you say, look, this is killing me, this is kicking my butt. I need some help, but I'm gonna overcome. Like I'm determined to continue to move forward, despite the fact that I might have a little downtime. Like every day. I'll give you an example when I'm thinking about just how I try to function on a day-to-day basis. I get up and I wake up and I'm really determined to work hard. And a lot of my personal anxieties disappear, things I'm worried about, it goes away for a while. And then I'm just trudging along. Then I start just getting tired and things start wearing on me and I start getting worn down. And then I get to the point where I'm like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. This is not fun anymore. I'm gonna go recharge my batteries. Or I'm just going to take a day away from this so I can come back as a stronger person. So it almost seems like maybe finding a healthy coping mechanism is kind of a way to sort of begin that process. What do you think, Dr. White?
Absolutely. I mean, we're not immune to life. I kind of always say, like, as you were talking about, you get up in the morning, you're refreshed, you're ready to go. And a lot of times you go through your day and life happens. We all encounter barriers or opposition into what we're doing. And even more so when it comes to emotions, and if you're talking about even specifically financial anxiety, these things can seep in. You might be right in the middle of your workday, trying to concentrate on what you're doing, but then all of a sudden you're all of a sudden realizing, oh wow, wait a minute, that bill, how am I going to pay for this? And all these different thoughts about concerns that you may have, or really concerns that you might have, start to seep in your day. And it's nothing physical necessarily that's coming or happening, but that and two also includes what I mean by life happens.
Well, everybody who's watching, who just came in, some of you just came in on YouTube on drboycetv.com. Some of you are in the Black Business School. Some of you are on Instagram. I want you guys to know I'm talking to Dr. Chris White. Dr. Chris White she has 2 PhDs, one in clinical psychology, one in industrial organization. And we're talking about the topic that isn't discussed very often, which is financial anxiety, the financial stress, how money problems, I believe, can actually create or exacerbate mental illness. And I'm going to ask you about that, Dr. White, actually, just sort of that linkage, because, if you look up the number one things that stress people out is usually money. Money is, they say money, can't buy happiness, but I've seen people, I do believe money problems can buy you some unhappiness, and so anyway, I see some people in here. I see Michael and Crystal and Life Lessons and Tommy Johnson. Do me a favor, if you're on YouTube, please hit the thumbs up button. Also, everybody who's watching Facebook anywhere, shout out your city, or shout out your business, or shout out your dream. So one of those 3 things, or all 3, go ahead and do a shout out. I'd love to see where you're from, what you're doing, and what your dream is. So everybody go ahead and do that shout out. And as I see the shout outs, I'm going to acknowledge that. So I want to ask Dr. White, My first instinct is this, and again, I'm so armchair psychologist on this. I just so this is like I'm really laying some bullshit on the table here, but I'm gonna pretend like it's real shit and not bullshit. But technically, my doctoral expertise was actually financial psychology. Right. So I ended up having to read some texts on psychology and a lot of research papers and stuff like that, because it was more so related to the linkage between, how you think and how your wealth grows, or how it depletes. And I'm a big believer in that. And that started with my grandmother, the strong Black woman I mentioned earlier. I keep my grandma alive by talking about her. That's why I always love to bring her up. She's the first person to introduce me to compound interest, but she never made more than $20,000 a year. She never studied business or money or anything like that. She wasn't married. She raised 4 kids by herself. And all through those years, I never saw my grandmother once have a financial problem. Not once. Maybe it happened and I just didn't know about it, but I never saw. I mean, I'm talking about car paid off, house paid off, life insurance policies perfectly intact. I saw people that made 4 times more money than her coming to her and borrowing money from her. So think about this. This is the counter to the narrative, right? Where I saw a study that said the median net worth of a single Black mom in America is like $5. And so in the midst of all this, my grandmother, never had a financial problem and would be making loans to people that were married, so they had 2 incomes and they were making 4 times more money. And I remember I asked her one time, because I had to write an article for Essence magazine about money and your mind and stuff like that. And I said, tell me your secrets. Like, how do you reflect on that? Because I want to get advice from my elders. And she said, money is psychological. She said, if your mind ain't right, then your money won't be right. If you're not thinking right, you're not going to make good decisions. But then also I was thinking about the other side of that in terms of how we respond to financial stress. And I'm wondering, when you talk about something like mental illness, and people have the nature versus nurture conversation, like how much of it, is, inherent in your DNA or whatever, and versus how much comes from your environment. Are you able to quantify examples in your mind, Dr. White, where financial problems or financial stress can actually either cause or trigger mental illness? Like, can you kind of speak to that?
Absolutely. The first thing to think about is how pervasive money is in our lives. A lot, if not almost everything we do, involves money in some kind of way. Money is a tool to where we're trying to get a lot of times. And so sometimes the money can be the thing that is a trigger, such as, a life event happens, losing your job, some emergency happens and it depletes your supply of money. And so that can very much trigger a response, whether it's, anxiety, depression. And what a lot of times happens is, that is common, doesn't necessarily mean that you're kicked into like a full-blown mental illness or clinical diagnosis. But a lot of times what happens is if over time, over many months and many years that this is happening and you're dealing with this, the anxiety and possibly even depression or some of the other emotions, what kind of happens is as those continue and they're not addressed or cope with in a healthy way, they kind of exacerbate, and so undealt with, not every time, but undealt with, it can turn into something that just like money becomes very pervasive. So now what I mean by that is, you start out very upset and anxious because of the trigger of what's going on with your finances. But then if it continues over the long haul, it starts to kind of become a cloud over your entire life. And so what that means more so in terms of actions and your everyday life is it starts coming out in everything you do. So now when you're going to your job, and like using the scenario we used earlier, what you talked about, Dr. Watkins, of waking up, you wake up in the morning and you're ready to go, after months of being anxious about your finances and having continual negative emotions or negative reactions about that, including like helplessness, because sometimes it's not an immediate. A lot of times when you have these emergency or these life events that you're not expecting and the money isn't quite there, it continues. And so, next thing you know, after all of this time that it continues, now it's affecting how you do your job. Now it's affecting how you are with your family. Next thing you know, maybe you're isolating. Next thing you know, all of the things that you're telling yourself are negative. Like you're worthless. You don't have, your finances are messed up. So, you're not worth anything. Your personal worth is now somehow tied to your net worth. And so that's where it can kind of, I think time is a good indicator of, having these feelings. And that's even in the DSM when you go to a psychologist, when they try to understand exactly what's going on with you, duration of your symptoms is often a hallmark of that identification of what you're going through.
That's really interesting. You triggered a lot of thoughts there, and I have some questions I'm going to ask you, but I'm just enjoying the flow of this discussion because I think you can gain something from this. When you talk about this idea that we sort of look at the length of time that the symptoms have been there. I know a lot of the people I grew up with. Tell me, guys, if you know what I'm talking about. I know people that it seems like they've been traumatized since they were babies. By not just the financial, but by all the other chaos in their lives, and a lot of it did link to money. I've seen people get killed over money. I've seen people become prostitutes over money. I've seen people abandon families over money, and so when you talk about the length of time the symptoms are there, it almost seems logical to almost look at this as, if you're constantly in that fight or flight kind of mode, like that's what I feel like when I'm worried about money, business, whatever. It's basically fight or flight. I guess what is it, cortisol and the adrenaline, whatever the chemicals are. Like I'm like, okay, gotta get up, gotta go do it. It seems like there's gotta be something unhealthy about feeling like that every single day. And I you compound that with being Black in America. I knew a guy that said that he would every day he went out to work, he felt like he was going to war. Like he had a black fist on his wall and he would punch the fist to say, yeah, I'm ready to fight. That can't be good. Like, as a psychologist, if somebody tells you that they're living in a constant fight or flight kind of mindset, how would that make you feel? Or what would you sort of say to that?
Well, certainly, I would be concerned because, when you're in that sense of, if you're in the fight or flight response it's not meant, evolutionary response is not to stay in the fight or flight long term. Okay. And the thing about, how we've evolved as a society is that, back in the day, it was, oh, we see a bear. Just to make a simple example, we see a bear, we have the fight or flight response, the bear goes away. The thing that's a little bit trickier nowadays is that those things that replace the bear are not things that are physical or necessarily visual that we see. A lot of times it can be triggered within our own mind. If we're not aware about that, we may not even be aware that we're having this stress reaction, this flight or fight reaction. And so it's important, awareness is really one of the first steps to getting to that. Now, that being said, if you've got a person who's been in that fight or flight response for an extended amount of time, certainly at minimum, you're going to see some physical effects of that. Cortisol has a function in our body and in our response to emotions, but it is not meant to be continually released over and over and over again for an extended period of time. When it does, it's going to start having negative effects on your health, both mentally and physically. Physically, a lot of times, depending on, who you are and how aware you are of kind of your emotions, physically is one of oftentimes what a lot of people first start seeing. But those are not necessarily the first symptoms you see, because it builds up, the cortisol builds up, and then you start seeing, the responses and the manifestations of that cortisol running through your body.
Wow. Everybody, I'm talking to Dr. Chris White, and she's a doctorate in clinical psychology as well as industrial organization. And we're talking about ways that money can affect you psychologically and create financial anxiety or perhaps mental illness or trigger things inside of you, and how to cope with that. And everybody who's watching, please, if you're on YouTube, please make sure you hit the thumbs up button if you haven't done that. If you're on Facebook, we ask you, please support Intelligent Black Media by sharing the video, pushing it out so everybody can see it, starting these conversations, because we all know that discussions about mental health have to happen. We can't move forward as a community if we don't address the trauma and the mental illness that really comes from the things that we've had to overcome. And that's why I wanted to have this important conversation. And thank you to Dr. White for joining us. So Dr. White, let me jump in and I'm going to ask you, I had a couple questions here. The first thing I want to ask you, and someone from the audience actually submitted this question, and they would like to know, when you talk about, finances and your kids, sort of, not really being interested in finances. This is a little bit of a switch. This is another psychological thing, right? Like mind tricks, maybe. What are ways to get them engaged with the financial conversation without them, being bored to death? I know that it's teaching your child about their financial future is one of the most important things you can do for them, because when they grow up, this is going to be the huge thing that causes stress and anxiety, and they'll maybe marry the wrong person or do something wrong or whatever. So many people are in jail because they didn't know how to make money the regular way. So you protect your kids from that, and you want to teach them, but sometimes kids don't want to hear that, right? They want to listen to, a Cardi B song, or they want to learn how to dance or play a sport, but money comes off as boring until money becomes real. How do you sort of prepare your kids for that without them just, being bored to death and not listening to you?
Well, first I want to say that's a very important question to have, because one of the things that, even us as adults, our relationship with money is often formed by what happened to us in childhood. What did we see our parents doing? Someone who's grown up in a family where, and a lot of us have been there, where money is an issue, or money, there wasn't enough money, that money was a struggle. How their parents respond to that is definitely influences and kind of teaches us, in a way, for lack of a better word, about how to respond to money and what that relation to money looks like. So it's a good question. I think one of the ways to really do that without boring your children, if you will, or having them think about, another lesson, is to weave it into everyday activities. If you take your children to the grocery store or shopping or whatever, those are opportunities, possible teachable moments. So maximize those teachable moments. It's not so much of let's sit down and talk about money, but going out there when you're out with your children, having them be aware, talking to them about, how much groceries cost. A lot of times what I find when I've run into children who haven't really been talked to a lot about money is they have no idea how much it costs to eat. So that's important, and look, children aren't thinking about that. They're thinking about, how much does it cost to go to the adventure park, those kinds of things. And a lot of times, hey, I'm even guilty, being younger, like just not even thinking about where money comes from, but asking my parents, can I have this? Can I have that? And always hearing no, but never really having it to not having it explained too much in detail about why it's no. So I think, it's important to weave it into everyday activities, and that helps set up your children, because the reality is when we become adults, it is our everyday reality, right? I feel like every time I step out the house, and sometimes when I don't step out the house, money's involved. Okay, so you're setting up your children in that way of understanding that, money is a pervasive thing. It's something that we have to pay attention to and actively manage. It's not, I think the fairy tale a lot of times for some children is, especially when they're not talked to about money, they just see things coming in, they see products coming in, they see money being spent. They're not necessarily having a concept that, there's a paycheck coming in and there's work that happens to get that paycheck or obtain that paycheck. So, definitely weaving it in, very early on. One of the biggest mistakes I think that can happen is when you protect your child, even as teenagers, you protect them and don't really spend too much time talking about money or how finances work. And then you send them out to the world, you send them out to college. They're really going out there ill-equipped, because they're a lot of times without knowing and having those talks over the years about money and how money works and how money contributes to your way of living. We send them out in the world like with none of that conversation or minimal conversation about that. They kind of, again, are ill-equipped. They don't have the tools. They're not really understanding. So what happens a lot of times, they get a big check, they get $200, from their part-time job or whatever, or what, and they're thinking, oh, I'm rich. And then they have to realize the hard way, wow, $200 goes like that in many cases. Right?
What did Dave Chappelle, didn't Dave Chappelle, I maybe I got it wrong, but I know what it was. He was talking about how he would love to get Oprah pregnant, and he said, "I'm rich, bitch." But that was me in high school. I would get that little paycheck. I think I worked at Taco Bell and also at Wendy's, and you get that check, and then you go as a teenager, you cash it. It's straight cash. So I suddenly have all this cash in my pocket, and every time it was the same mind trick. Every time I would always think that I had enough money to like live forever. You know what I mean? Like I could have literally like moved out of my parents' house and been like, I'm good. I got my check. I'm fine. Anybody ever gone through that before? Tell me if you had that experience. And then it's sort of like you just nickel dime yourself into the ground. Like it's like $5 here, $2 there. And before you know it, all the money's gone. And if you've never really taught to manage, or never really been taught to manage money, it's like you can continue that into adulthood, where you've got 50-year-olds who are wealthy ballers on Friday night, and they are, in poverty Thursday afternoon, right before payday. So I agree with that. That's really interesting. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt your point. I didn't know if you had more to say on that particular question.
No, that was a great point. I think the other thing that you can do is, with children, make it a game. Money can be easily turned in, teaching about money and how it works can easily be a game, because, and some, like you said, sometimes you get to the zero sum, so you can make it fun and exciting for them to learn, but also use real examples, because, and what I was talking about, just to elaborate too on what you were saying, your example about, when you got your paycheck after working your part-time job, many of us are relying upon student loans when we go into higher education. Well, guess what? They give you a big lump sum of money. And if you don't know how to manage that money, you got to make that last, 4 or 5 months? So, 4 or 5 months.
I think you just triggered the shit out of about 80% of the people in this live stream. Anybody remember that? Anybody ever get anybody go to school where you get that big ass check after like you get your loan and it's more than the amount that it costs to pay for school? Am I the only one in here that's ever got that check? And it's like, it's a, you know what it is, Dr. White? It's like, it's a drug. Like I remember I felt high at that moment, and you're up in TJ Maxx and you going to Red Lobster to get the cheddar biscuits, new shoes, like fresh as hell. And it's so funny because it's like I'm almost feel angry. No, not angry, but angry in a good way, like almost betrayed by the fact that I did not understand at that time, like all the things that money can really do for you if you know what to do with it, besides spend it. Some of us are trained, psychologically to just like you just consume, buy. And that's what I did, and here I am, now years later, I'm a finance professor. I know a lot of things, but I'm gonna tell you the truth. And this goes back to the psychology of all of this. There were years where I knew what to do. I studied, in college, like capital and investing and ROI and, all of that, but I didn't do it. Why? Well, because I felt like that was like white people's culture. That's what they do. I'm just studying it from a theoretical standpoint, almost like a white kid who listens to gangster rap and he's bobbing his head. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna shoot that, the songs use the N-word and all that, right? I'm gonna do this, and I robbed the bank and held a drug deal. And he ain't doing none of that shit. It's all theoretical for him, right? But he loves it. He's like, oh yeah, Lil Uzi Vert is my favorite rapper, and whatever. But it's not his life, right? And I think sometimes, as a black man, I had that same relationship with studying finances. It was like, yeah, I'm studying it, but it's all theory because this is not what I grew up with. This is not what my family does. This is not what my community does. This is not part of my culture. And I had to ask myself, like, what the hell's wrong with me? Like, no, I need to step into that, as opposed and live this, as opposed to just knowing these things. But it's hard, because culture and how it shapes your thinking, it's just hard. I don't know if any of y'all know this. I mean, it's almost like knowing, like what healthy food looks like, but you don't eat it because that's just not what you're used to. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that. I didn't mean to drop all that on you, but I don't know if you had any thoughts to add to what I just said there.
I mean, let's face it. I don't think any of us need to be taught how to be a consumer. Our environment teaches us that, right? Spend, spend, spend. That's easy. No one needs to be taught about that. And as a matter of fact, I feel like because of the culture these days, what's been talked about money, the glorification of some of these, famous people that, are multi-million dollars, they're without that talk, without that education about finances and the relationship you have with money, what happens in the absence of that is, oh, I can just consume it. I mean, the Kardashians have it, or these ballers over here have it, the football player, but there are even stories of famous people who've come into a lot of money that mismanaged it. So I think that unfortunately a lot of the signs and things that are out there in our environment are giving the message that money is easy to come by, not just easy to spend, that it's easy to come by, but that's not exactly true. A lot of us, we're not necessarily born into money, obviously, and so it's just not, we have to earn it. And so I've run into, especially some of, folks who are more, teenagers, college age students who don't really understand. They see the lifestyle and they want that lifestyle, but they don't understand the relationship to money and how to get there. And especially without, like I said, without the with the absence of having that discussion or education over the years, or even just examples of how to manage your money, there's just this assumption that it's just that easy. Okay, I'm just gonna make this song, I'm gonna make this rap song, and then I'm gonna become big. No, and those that I've talked to that have had those kinds of thoughts, I will challenge them. Like, do you really think that was the first song that person made? Do you really think that Drake just made this song overnight and he became a millionaire just like that? No. Even those, there of course there's a small population or a small proportion of our population that that maybe come into money, inheritance or whatever, but that is not the majority of us, especially those of us who are in the typically oppressed groups. We're coming from the opposite side and trying to move up there. So yeah, it's, I can't stress enough how important it is and how much of a gift you can give your children by teaching them very early on how to address it. I mean, if one thing I can say, like credit cards, I don't know if you all notice when you're in college campuses, these credit card companies, they're willing, take this card. These college students, oftentimes who are opening these credit cards, they haven't been taught, and then with also this misunderstanding of how to manage your money and not realizing, okay, this money has to last this long and you have to manage it. What happens? We start racking up the credit cards. Next thing we know, 3-4 months later, we're in major debt.
Mm-hmm.
And that student, and if you were in college and were blessed enough to have that extra after they pay for your books and your tuition and all that, that money's gone too. So now you're in like almost doubly worse situation than you were to begin with before you had that credit card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I want everybody to know who I'm talking to. I'm talking to Dr. Chris White. Dr. Chris White is she is a doctorate in both clinical psychology and industrial organization. And we're talking about the psychology of money, as well as how money problems can cause mental illness or financial anxiety, the stressors that come with that. And now everybody who's watching on YouTube, if you have not done this yet, if you have not hit the thumbs up button yet, please do us the honor of hitting the thumbs up button. Please, we would really appreciate that. Just hit the thumbs up button. Also, please hit the share button, subscribe button, etc. Also, if you want a text notification when we go live, you can text the word Boyce to 31996. Text Boyce to 31996. We're also on iTunes. So if you search for my name on iTunes, you can actually listen to the audio or the video in your car or wherever you are. Dr. White, so I'd like to move in a slightly different direction here and ask you about coping. Let's say that I'm a person that feels stressed out about my finances. Either I don't have enough money, or I don't know what to, I hate my job, but I can't get out, right? I feel trapped, or I'm locked into a financial situation I want to get out of. I don't know if it could be a bad business partnership or a bad marriage. Maybe I've seen people. I actually remember when I was in high school, I remember one of my friend's moms trying to kill herself because her actually I had two friends whose moms were both trying to kill themselves at the same time. They attempted suicide. They didn't actually complete it. I guess they bonded around the suicide attempts. It was very, very interesting. And one mother was she attempted suicide because she had married a man in college when she was 20 years old who was going to be a dentist. And so she said, well, since he's going to be a dentist, I don't have to graduate from college. So she stayed with him. You know the story. You can probably see how it's going to go, right? So he becomes a dentist. He starts making all his money. She doesn't have a degree. She leaves the workforce. And when he gets about 40 years old, 43, he trades the 40 in for 220s. You know what I'm talking about, right? So he runs off with, literally ran off with a 23-year-old. And she was stuck there, thousands of dollars a month in bills, kids in private school, emotionally destroyed, from what happened. So she attempted suicide. Then her friend, at the same time, around the same time, attempted suicide, but it was different. She was still married to her husband, but she felt that she could not leave the marriage because her husband was making all the money. And she literally just flat out said, I stayed because of the money. And it was real weird to me because as a black kid, or not even as a black kid, just as me growing up in my household, I didn't get to hear grown-ups talk about grown-up shit. My parents would take that shit in the other room. I never saw them argue. I really didn't. I thought they were like brother and sister, always on the same page. But so it was strange to go to my friend's house and hear these grown women having this adult conversation in front of all of us. And so it was weird, but I learned a lot. And I never forgot that conversation because I was like, wow. So this means that if you're not financially secure or financially prepared, you can end up having a lot of stress in your life, right? So instead of focusing on that aspect of preventative measures, which you guys know that we talk about this all the time, I'd like to talk about coping. If you're feeling the financial anxiety and you're just stuck in a weird situation and you can't necessarily change the situation right away, what are some coping tactics that you can recommend that people might want to apply to the lives that they're living right now?
That's a great question and an important one. I think the first step is to understand, what are the symptoms to having financial anxiety? Are you aware of those reactions and able to label them as anxiety? Typical anxiety across in any situation, aside, including money, is excessive worry. You're more irritable. You're having difficulty. A lot of times even if you don't realize how much you're worrying, You start to notice, oh, I'm having difficulty focusing or concentrating on things. Those are like some very common symptoms of high anxiety. I think when it comes to money, especially, anxiety about your finances might manifest in a way that's like obsession with being frugal, having somebody else take care of your finances, so you're avoiding it. Let me just give it to somebody else to do it. Overspending, retail therapy. We all know about retail therapy. This here's a really interesting one that doesn't always come to those of us, like, always comes to mind when we're thinking logically, but discomfort with accumulating wealth. What does that mean for me? Relying entirely on others to help you with your financial management despite incentives. Like you mentioned that actually earlier, Dr. Watkins. You had a point in time where you were getting all this information, and in a way you had the education, you had some incentive, but there was something else holding you back. So most likely that was, you might have had some anxiety about those finances. I think a lot of us, especially even including me, have had those situations. A lot of times what it can also result in, that I think can be particularly detrimental, is when we start feeling guilty and shamed. Those are symptoms that can really manifest in a way that has longer term effects. When we feel shamed and we're giving having negative self-talk about, oh, what's wrong with me? Why did I get there? So-and-so's in this situation, in a better situation. Why am I not?
So let me stop you on that one. I want to ask about that. Because there's a lot of debate I hear constantly about, from people that almost seem to make you feel bad if you're doing well. Everybody else is in the struggle. You should be in the struggle too. And it causes people that have risen out of the struggle sometimes to manifest that guilt. I'm telling on myself, y'all. I'm getting my therapy here. So this is like therapy out in the open. But I found that that dealing with that guilt and that shame of actually being able to be financially secure when so many people were not, ways that it manifests for me was, one, I was given till it literally hurt, and I was constantly emotionally hurt. You loan money to people, they don't pay it back, or you feel like somebody's situation is something, you're solving everyone else's problems, because you feel like because you were the lucky one, you were the survivor, and they're just, and then also just dealing with, the challenges of, there are so many people that I see that will just get angry because it looks like you're doing well, and so it's like, oh, you're a bad person because you're not broke like the rest of us, so that therefore makes you evil. And then you're like, well, wait, am I evil? Like, I don't want to be evil. Like, maybe I need to be poor. Maybe if I take a vow of poverty, then they won't think I'm a bad person anymore. Maybe if I just pretend like I'm broke like you. So it's kind of weird. So what you said really hit home with me anyway. I don't know if anybody else has ever gone through that or not. That survivor's guilt, it's real big. Please continue. I just had to throw that in there. You can answer however you'd like, but go ahead. Sorry.
No, I mean, you're exactly right. It's kind of a little bit like a survivor's guilt. And I think that a lot of times we end up grappling a lot with, are we really going to continue to be a member of the group? That group that we've always been a part of. Because now they're looking at you as, you're different. You're no longer part of this group because you're different. You elevated. So you're right. Exactly all the things the examples that you gave are exactly what happened. And all of those messages we internalize as, we're different. We're different. We succeeded. Now maybe we're responsible. And if we have any anxiety about not being part of that group anymore, we start acting upon that anxiety to do things to be part of the group that may not be the best for us financially. So, there's a, social psychology theory about, in and out group. Group membership is huge in terms of, whether times of seeking support, but just like even in the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy, belonging is a factor. That is part of what we need, just like we need food and water in many ways, at least from a mental or psychological point of view. So what happens a lot of times is when you're that person in your little community or your group or even the larger group, when you're that person that has elevated and has now been seen by others as being very financially successful, they're going to start, it seems that people start to say, okay, or start saying things that give you messages that you're no longer part of this. You're no longer belong as part of our group necessarily. And that's hard to deal with. Because then if you're not part of that original group, the group that you've always belonged to, well, then what are you? So then that's when a lot of the psychological components, kind of kick in, and we start reacting in certain ways that may be in total contrast to what are the, effective ways of managing our money and our finances.
It's almost like this past week I read about this little girl who she's 16. You guys can go check out the video on drboycetv.com. Me and Dr. Claude Anderson talked about this. She's 16 and she got accepted into 9 law schools. And it was an interesting story because she was actually doing very badly in school. She was really struggling. And she said that the reason she struggled was because, people made her feel bad for being a good student. So she became a bad student in order to fit in. And her mother was smart enough and her father was smart enough to pick up on that. And so, so by taking them out of school, they said, we're going to just homeschool our kids. It got rid of that peer pressure and she just took off like an eagle, because there's nobody there to say, oh, you're trying to make straight A's, you're acting white or whatever. Right. And actually what's interesting, in that family, the excellence is contagious because her brother is like 11 and he's in high school and her sister's 13. She's starting college, so you kind of got this new culture, this new group that they now belong to where they're now doing amazing things. And I can remember times where I felt like, okay, in order for me to really overcome the things I was struggling with, dealing with racism or whatever, as I said, some people, I got to get away from that group. I can't be in that group because that group over there, these guys, they're going to be dead by 40, so I need to find another group. And sometimes it's hard, especially when mass media is promoting certain types of groups. So, like, okay, if you're a black male, you're supposed to be like this, or, basketball and rap and drinking and smoking and thugging and all that stuff. Ain't nobody really, they're not really mass marketing black men reading books and working on the computer and building wealth and starting businesses, So anyway, before we move on, let me tell everybody who I'm talking to. I'm talking to Dr. Chris White. Dr. Chris White, she has doctorates in let me get it right. Clinical psychology, and I said her industrial organization, right?
That's right.
Got it. And we're talking about ways that money can affect your mental health or cause mental illness or financial anxiety, things like that. A lot of you guys have experienced it. If you're not experiencing it now, do me a favor, if you're watching, please hit that thumbs up button. If you're on YouTube, please hit the thumbs up button. Please share the video. Also, if you want to support intelligent Black media, we'd love to have you as part of our tribe of intelligent Black people. If you would like to support, and we give you things in exchange, it's not a donation, it's an investment to help us spread our message through the world. Please go to intelligentblackpeople.com. That's intelligentblackpeople.com. And also, we're doing the special lecture on Monday night where I'm going to break down the BEEP. That's the word BEEP with 3 E's instead of 2 E's, and it stands for Black Economic and Educational Excellence Plan, which I'm actually proposing as a replacement to 529 college plan, so you can avoid the debt trap of college and also avoid the declining or the declining wealth issue that we're dealing with in the community, where the median Black wealth is expected. I don't know if you know this, Dr. White, but we were talking about this earlier, that there's studies that say median Black wealth is supposed to go down to 0 by the year 2053. And a lot of it's related to overspending for college and going in debt and then dying in debt. And then on top of that, not having proper insurance and things like that. And so we've actually, in the Black Business School, put together remedies to make sure that people do not contribute to that statistic. So ain't nobody in here trying to be a statistic. So everybody repeat after me. I am not a statistic. I will not be a statistic. My kids will not be a statistic. You're going to be great. So Dr. White, let me ask you the next question that I had here. When you talk about anxiety and depression, you know, and a lot of people just live with it, they just carry it, they just say it's just part of the course, it's just part of the experience. What are some dangers of carrying that around and not confronting it and addressing it?
Well, the thing is that it can become, again, it just like money, it's a pervasive thing. So, at first you may start to have anxiety symptoms or even depression symptoms just around a certain aspect. Maybe in this, like in our talk today, maybe it's around money and finances. If you have some kind of emergency that comes up, just like in general, sometimes we can be kicked into at least a momentary depressive symptoms when we lose someone very dear to us. Same thing can happen with money. And a lot of times those things go hand in hand. I've had a situation very recently within my family where, um, unexpected death and no life insurance. So, money was a big thing just to address the death itself on top of everything you're dealing with. Um, but the idea is that I go back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of duration. It's the idea is not to ever not have anxiety or not get sad about anything. We're human, that's natural. And we're going to have blips, we have highs and lows. But when you get to the point where, you're 3-4 months down the line and you're still having these symptoms, most likely what happens too is that those symptoms become more pervasive. So you start to have anxiety or sadness, not just about money, but it starts to happen throughout your day. All of a sudden you wake up and you're no longer that person who's like, I'm ready to go this morning, and go throughout your day. Instead, you're like, I don't even want to get up. That's where, what happens if it's not addressed is it starts affecting all parts of your life. And that's what I mean by it being pervasive. Suddenly now you're not your optimal self. When you have anxiety long term and you're dealing with the symptom of, classic symptom of not being able to concentrate or focus, that's going to affect how you're doing your job. It's going to affect how you are with your family. And then a lot of times when it goes, when you have these symptoms and they continue on for a long term, a longer duration, you start to see other symptoms come along. For example, you might start isolating. And you might, one classic thing I think that comes with, especially if you're someone that has shame around your relationship with money. Shame it's an evil thing, if I can say, for lack of a better word. And one thing that's always stuck with me, long time ago, I was watching some interview with Oprah, and she explained you cannot shame anyone into change, and that's the thing. You become, in its most severe cases, you become unable to be your best self, and so you become ineffective in many ways. And in a sense, what that happens, especially with money, is, for example, very common, if I have a lot of anxiety, especially over a longer period of time, and I went through this especially in college. Money, I think we've all went through not having a lot of money when we're going through grad school or undergrad or whatever. But over a long term, you start to feel overwhelmed. When we start to feel overwhelmed, a lot of times our reaction is avoidance and escapism. So I don't want to look at it. I don't want to deal with it. I'm going to have somebody else take care of it, or, I'm going to do something over here that helps me escape, whether it's like having a drink or whatnot. So, I think the biggest thing about, in terms of that question, the danger is that at minimum, there is no sense of just coming out of it naturally. You don't just suddenly get better. And I think, when I think about money, particularly, emotions around money, it makes me think a little bit about some, people, stories I've read over time about people who like win the lottery, and then later on, they really still aren't in a better place. And I think the underlying piece of that is the emotions that are attached with money. The the best thing we can do is take a minute, and I think this has to do with coping too, is take a minute and really dig deep and understand what is your relationship with money, and how does that relate to what your personal values are. You know, money is very tied to our identity, and our identity is is a core of who we are. So when you understand that relationship better, you can navigate, I think, better through it. But going back to your original question, I kind of went off on a tangent for a minute, but I think the dangers of it is the fact that if you let it go on too long without addressing it, you're going to start seeing that it's going to affect more and more of areas of your life, and make you less and less effective in what you're doing. You're going further and further from your best version of yourself, even though it started just about money.
Wow, pretty heavy. I see some of you are asking if we have any programs in the Black Business School that kind of address issues like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a financial therapy section of one of the programs that we have. The program is at blackkeystogreatness.com. That's blackkeystogreatness.com, and that's where we cover all the life skills necessary to be successful. Psychology is everything. If you guys want to give that program a try, I've laid out a whole curriculum on time management, goal setting, overcoming obstacles, dealing with adversity. We talk about everything from how to overcome the haters to how to refocus when you have a setback. And so what I want to do is I'm going to put a section in there on financial therapy, where you can kind of deal with financial anxiety. You can work through the psychological challenges that come with wealth building. So if you're interested, you can actually get a 30-day free trial. Somebody please type in the URL. It's blackkeystogreatness.com. That's blackkeystogreatness.com. And we're actually going to invite Dr. White, and as well as some other therapists to come in and really help us get our mind right. Tell me if you agree. Tell me, guys, if you understand where I'm coming from. I really, really believe that, if you can't get your mind right, you can't get anything right. You can't get your goals right. You're not going to get your family right. You're not going to get your health right. You're not going to get your finances right. So I think this is really helpful, valuable information. And I want to say thank you, Dr. White, for sharing this. And so what I'm going to do is move on to another question I'd like to dig into. And actually, before I ask that question, I want to tell everybody, please hit the thumbs up button, please hit the share and subscribe button and all that good stuff. One of the things I remember hearing Dr. Alicia share with me, that awesome woman by my side. I get my therapy every morning, y'all. Even if I don't want it, she shoves the therapy down my throat. But
So lucky. You're so lucky.
She's sitting right here listening, so she's like, "Stop it! Go
ahead, Dr. Alicia."
Abuse. That's what it is. But anyway, she one of the things she said to me once that stuck with me that I thought was interesting, and I didn't know this. Maybe you can speak on this. Is she talked about how depression and anxiety tend to be deeply connected. That
Yes.
People that have depression have anxiety and vice versa. And I never connected the two. I never saw that. When I think of anxiety, I think of like nervousness, like, oh, I'm anxious, I'm scared. And then to me, depression comes off, I always thought of depression as like, oh, I can't get up, I'm worn out, blah, blah, blah. And so I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And then another thing that came to mind earlier when we were mentioning the book Black Pain, that talked about how many Black women are just so strong that they're just kind of sleepwalking, through life, because they feel like nobody cares about their pain. They don't have time to self-love and things like that. And it made me think about also with Black males. Tupac Shakur actually said something in a song where he actually referenced the anxiety and depression experienced by the Black male. He did it in his own way. It was in his song. Tell me if you guys remember this. It was in the song Only God Can Judge Me. You remember he said, "No more hesitation, each and every Black male's trapped. And they wonder why we're suicidal, running around strapped," right? Like why you don't care about your life, why you are killing yourself either quickly or slowly, right? Either you die in a blaze of fire or you die, with a liquor bottle next to your dead body, right? But you're dying either fast or slow. And then the other thought it led me to, and I know I'm giving you a lot of thoughts, but we can go back to the depression anxiety linkage if you want me to keep it simple for you. But there's a stream of consciousness. The last thing that it made me connect to is I remember hearing about a study where they actually looked at rats, and they were looking at depression in rats, and I guess they measured it by the amount of, I guess, serotonin in their brain or something else. And what they found was that, or the way the experiment seemed to go was, they gave the rats, they would do the same thing to all the rats, which is, hit them with electric shocks, and they were really painful, and the rats didn't like it. And for some of the rats, they gave them a lever they could pull, and when they pulled the lever, the shocks would stop. And then for the other rats, there was no lever. The shocks would just keep coming, and there's nothing you could do. And you get to a point where you just start feeling helpless. And they found that obviously the rats that felt helpless, that had no control over their lives, that felt trapped, were more likely to feel depressed. So linking that with what, what Tupac said, as well as the depression anxiety link, it's almost like it's sort of connecting to what you're saying, that a lot of depression and anxiety seems to be linked to just feeling trapped, not having options, not having freedom. And given that freedom in the Black community is such a consistent conversation, we talk about freedom, freedom, we want freedom. I think that it's a matter of understanding like what freedom is, and really realizing just how important freedom is to your mental health. Like, freedom is options. Options come from having skills that allow you to manage and deal with your situation. And when you don't have options and skills and freedom, then you get depression and anxiety. So that's me going full circle, kind of the long way. Do you have any thoughts on what I just kind of laid out?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I wholeheartedly agree with you. I mean, in terms of the last question that we talked about, what happens, what are the dangers of having it on a long term, or having it go, having the anxiety and depression symptoms occur over a longer duration. Yeah, what, a lot of times what happens, the hallmark of depression is helplessness and hopelessness. A lot of people don't understand, why would you kill yourself? Well, I can understand why people would ask that question, because it's very unnatural. But when you get into a situation, kind of like you said with the rat study, if you're helpless and hopeless and you're continually being shocked, or in our lives, maybe hit with life events, and we're not feeling we don't have any hope anymore, because we don't see any way out of it. We don't see any way we can change the situation, and that it's just continue. That's very dangerous from a mental health perspective. That's where you kind of move into the helplessness and hopelessness, and see people who become more suicidal. But anxiety is a part of that too. It overlaps in terms of, a lot of times, like, when we have some of the basic emotions like shame, fear, guilt, though all three of those things, can manifest into a larger picture of depression and anxiety. And those are the things that a lot of times becomes kind of like a cycle that we end up staying in until we can get kicked out of it. Because what happens is, if those emotions grab onto us, and what I mean by that is, that ends up being internalized, and we start telling ourselves that, and we stay in that space, you're eventually going to have those feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. And it kicks us out of the natural process of basically, addressing some life event that may have kicked us off of our natural, happy or content kind of process that we've had in life. When we talk about coping, this is where I think it's important. With goal setting, we talk about goal setting. Well, the psychological aspect, I think, of why goal setting is helpful. Well, listen, we can be real. We can set goals all day, right? It's not going to immediately pay off our bills or get rid of our debt. But what it will do is address that fear and anxiety. Sometimes maybe if you have the shame, and then of course the depression that goes along with it. What it does is, when you start setting that goals, when you start really putting it down on paper, setting those goals, and then attaching some milestones to it, you start to see the progress. And that is something that directly counters these thoughts of nothing's going to change, nothing's going to help me. So you do some goal setting, you set those attainable, realistic milestones, and then you go back and you review it, and you see yourself making that progress. And that is a direct counter to what your mind is saying, especially if you're in the full-fledged, anxiety disorder or clinical depression. So yeah, and I think, I kind of think of a model like anytime we want to make a change, and I think it kind of applies here too. First we need to be aware, and I touched upon that earlier. You need to be aware of what is your relationship with money. What does it mean to you? You kind of touched upon it. Does money signify security? Does it signify the ability to have some control? Is it about freedom? Is it about safety? It's different things, or maybe all of those things for some people. But then also looking at what is your reaction to money? What is your relationship with money? Do you have physical reactions to it? Do you have emotional reactions to it? Do you immediately think about your bills and then your mind explodes and you start ruminating about that? That's where you need to start. So obviously, Dr. Watkins, you're the expert in finances and management, and so there are absolutely things, steps that you can have people take. But the psychology behind it is also about making those changes. So we talked about earlier that there's a lot of us, me included, we may have the tools, we may have the education, we may even have the incentive to change, but the change doesn't always come as easily as getting that knowledge and getting that information. So I look at it as kind of a model, and the first step in the model of changing in terms of a psychological aspect is awareness. You got to be aware of how something is affecting you. And then once you're aware of what's happening, like for example, what's triggering, when you're sitting down, whether it's monthly or whatever kind of time period, when you're sitting down dealing with your finances, what are those emotions that are being triggered? What are those physical reactions that are happening? And then understanding kind of the reaction overall you're having. And what that does is, you're on your path to understanding that, or getting to a point where you control your emotions instead of your emotions controlling you. Because I know a lot of people, myself included, at a different time where, I would get upset about my money situation. Tell me this makes any sense whatsoever. And then I would be upset, overwhelmed, and go do retail therapy, and then make my debt higher. That was my emotions. I knew better. I had the incentive. I saw the debt I was in, but I get overwhelmed. My emotions get more of me. So the model I'm talking about is first becoming aware, and then when you're aware and have a deeper awareness, understanding the triggers, understanding how your relationship with that object, then you can start thinking about the behavioral change. Which is a process. You start with, okay, I'm having that thought or I'm having that reaction, then you start to make those changes. But it's like everything else in life, including like learning how to ride a bike. We don't do it perfectly the first time, and we certainly don't do it perfectly every time until we gain mastery. And so you got to do that behavior change. But the trick, I think, is from a psychological point of view, is a lot of times when we're going through that behavior change, we don't realize or give enough leeway for ourselves to realize that it's something that takes place over time. And because it takes time, a lot of times we get kicked off of this process and we dive deeper into the shame or the fear or the guilt, and then we're back at square one, or we're not really being able to progress. So you make those behavior changes over time. So, one of those first steps is acknowledging that fear. A lot of times, like I was mentioning, we want to avoid it. We become overwhelmed. We get, the anxiety is kicking in. And so a lot of times the first reaction is, I'm not going to deal with this. Well, every time you avoid something that you're anxious about or feared, naturally what happens is you get this sense of failing. And then because you're avoiding it, you're not practicing it. And if you're not practicing it, you can't get to that sense of mastery that will help you gain your confidence and help you have a sense of accomplishment. So it kicks, that's what I mean by it kicks you out of that progress that you're trying to make and that behavioral change. And really, I think, from a financial management standpoint, where you're trying to go, if you're dealing with anxiety, which, I think fear is a piece of that. It's not necessarily like, you're afraid of money, but the fear is a lot of time part of that anxiety. And really where we're trying to get is to change that emotion, not from, from fear and anxiety to a respect. And so we're no longer, when we have respect for it, we're no longer feeling the need to avoid it. We're not having this reaction of, oh, I can't deal with this. I need to go do something else, or I want to avoid it. And so slowly but surely, that's where you're getting to. But it takes time, and it's a process to get there. And you have to be aware of being kicked off and going back, because a lot of times we'll just go back to those, we get triggered and we go back to those common responses and that common emotional reactions. And so when you're in the thick of that, this is when you really want to increase self-care. You want to do things that really give you that message of you're worthy. Give you those positive messages of you're worthy, you're making progress, you're doing good. Because a lot of times when you've got especially that shame, fear, and guilt, you're having negative self-talk, whether you realize it or not, that is pulling you down. And when you're pulling down, just like we talked about earlier, when it's not being addressed, it can only continue to manifest further and sometimes even exacerbate. And I think the other thing is when you're going through that process, you really got to be aware and start, really try to avoid comparing yourself to others. A lot of times, we'll look around and we'll say, well, they're doing better. What's wrong with me? But the reality is that, that's not a good objective measuring stick. I think it's better to look within your own goals, within your own self, because everybody has different situations. And the truth be known, especially with social media these days, I think about it as like an iceberg. We only see the tip of the iceberg. We don't see all these other things that necessarily led to what we're seeing on top of the water, right? So it's not a lot, but that's kind of a lot. Those were some of the thoughts that came to mind.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. Yeah. I mean, I've read some of those studies that say that people that obsess over social media tend to have issues with depression, because all these people are showing you their fake life, and you're comparing it to your real life. It's almost like with those poor little girls who are reading these magazines with and they see these women that are airbrushed and look like they weigh 90 pounds, and and I agree with you. I can definitely say that I remember getting to a point where I just, if I found myself obsessing over what somebody else was doing, I would just unfollow them or just shut it out of my head. And here I am, I'm having these, challenges in my 40s. I can't imagine being, 20 years old dealing with that. Right. But literally that would be my process. I'd be like, if I'm thinking too much about what you're doing and it's distracting me, I just shut it out, and it almost seems that I was taking notes as you were talking, because what you were saying, you were dropping so many gems, the psychological aspect of dealing with all this. And one thought that came to mind was I was thinking about how anxiety does become such a, or anxiety, shame, just all these negative emotions can become such a detriment, almost like a cancer. If you think about the way maybe a cancer would spread through your body, it's like it might start in one section of the body, but then it can just spread. And so it's like, if you've got a disease in your hand, and you don't treat it, it's going to spread through and eventually infect your whole body. So it's almost like if you have issues in your past that cause you anxiety and you're obsessed over that past and you can't get past that, then you're going to spread that cancer to your future. Your future becomes connected to your past because you chose to make that connection. Like there's no reason that your past has to be connected to your future. You just made that decision because you've defined yourself based on what's happened to you up to this point. So you're almost so trapped in the moment that you can't really look at the future. You can't see yourself as what you are, which is an evolving human being. Like, okay, you're like an example might be, I remember in college, even noticing how I would have friends that would say, gosh, I'm really bad at math. I'm really bad at math. And so as a result, what they would do is they would get extreme anxiety when you put a math problem in front of them. They would avoid math classes, by any means necessary. And so 3-4 years later, they're still saying, I'm really, really bad at math. I can't do math. But it's sort of like, well, if you spent those 3 years studying math and getting better at math, you wouldn't be able to say that anymore, right? So a lot of times it's hard for us to see, we see so much of who we are and who we were, that we can't see who we might be if we, if we begin that process, as you mentioned, of setting goals, which led to the second point that came to mind when you were talking about goal setting. I never knew why, like in that Black Keys to Greatness program I was telling you guys about, I talk extensively about goal setting, and I didn't know why. I'm not like Dr. White. I don't have a PhD in clinical psychology, but I noticed that setting goals gave me life. It was something that just gave me life. It made me feel like I had a sense of purpose. It's what almost like it pulled me out of bed every day, and it still does to this day, because in hindsight, I realized goal setting was big because it gave me a sense of purpose. It gave me hope. It let me know, like, hey, if you keep going, these things are going to get better. And then I started reading about, stories of people that survived the Holocaust. And they said one of the biggest factors of, of whether you survived or didn't survive was whether or not you had a sense of purpose, like something you had to do. Like, I still want to get out so I can go write a novel or see my family or whatever. And so I just tell people, like, look, that's what separates you from, the animals, the cows that are sitting out in the field just grazing away and eating until they die, is setting a goal and having some sort of sense of purpose. And that sense of purpose is what will drive you. And I will tell you that when I guess the reason that these things are really important in my mind is because, in high school, I had a huge problem with depression. It was linked to low self-esteem, a lack of a sense of purpose, so my self-worth was in the garbage because nobody ever really gave me that. I had to give that to myself. And so that depression was such a blessing, because I learned to be my own best psychologist. I started becoming obsessed with learning all the different ways you can shape your mind to position yourself to not just be a high achiever, but to really achieve the Holy Grail. I think the Holy Grail is not, it's not making $1 million or being super successful or running a big company. It's to fucking be happy, to me. Like, if you're happy, then you win. If you got $1 billion and you're miserable, then I think you lost the game. So Dr. White, everybody, please give the thumbs up button to Dr. White to just support the conversation and to let her know how much you appreciate what she's doing. I'm going to end with one more question, because I know you got a million things to do other than sitting here just hearing me yap away all day. And so I would like to ask you, let's see, I have the question in front of me and I wrote it down. Okay, so if you were to, and I know we touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to maybe make it specific so that we can help everybody that's in here. How do I know if I'm dealing with, some anxiety or depression as a result of what I'm going through? I think sometimes we become so numb that we don't even know the symptoms. In terms of establishing that awareness that you discuss, what are some signs I might look for in my day-to-day life that might lead me to say, okay, maybe I need some help, maybe I need a little bit of a boost?
Good question. So I think, we kind of touched a little bit upon it earlier in terms of just general symptoms of anxiety, ruminating, this is something that you're constantly thinking about over and over again, especially if it's something to the point that you're unable to fall asleep or it's waking you up at night. That's a pretty good indicator that you have some substantial anxiety around the issue. With regard to finances, especially if you find yourself, again, avoiding it, or, when you sit down to, if it's something within your practice to sit down and address your finances, or you start thinking about a project that encounters money and you start to feel overwhelmed, meaning like, I can't, you really literally start thinking, I can't do this, this is impossible. That is an indicator of anxiety. Let's see, avoidance, as we talked about, being uncomfortable or avoiding the topic. So, I'm just not going to do my bills, or I'm just not going to look at my balance because I can't deal with that right now. That's probably a good sign that you're having some anxiety around issues. Irritability. If you find yourself, especially if you're someone, within your family, or you have a partner with, you have a partner and you find that, everything's good until that topic of money comes up and you start getting irritable, and it ends up in, constant, I'm talking about trends too, the trend is it ultimately results in arguments or debates. instead of more of like a problem solving and a healthy discussion. Most likely you're having, some type of anxiety around your finances. You have an obsession. This was interesting. I found that obsession with being frugal, that can be also a sign of anxiety. Also, the opposite end is giving money away to, adult children or family and relatives. That can be another actual not, non atypical from just general anxiety about other issues, but that was one that is connected to anxiety with finances. Um, let's see. And again, we talked about, I think we've already touched upon some of the other ones, having shame around the idea. In other words, you don't want to talk to people about, some of the money issues you have or concerns you have. It's kind of like a dirty little secret. That's probably an indicator that you're having some anxiety around that. The sense of feeling helplessness, like, again, you avoid the situation because a lot of times you don't feel like there's anything that's going to change it. You've insurmountable debt. So, your reaction you find, or your behavior, is instead of really kind of trying to tackle it and break it down, even if it's something like you're sitting there and you're trying to do some goal setting and set some milestones or have plans, plan how you're going to approach the debt, and you just suddenly feel like, I'm overwhelmed, there's nothing that's going to help, you're you're definitely experiencing some anxiety around finances.
All right. I'm gonna Ashley Jackson. You're gonna get the privilege of us. This is the one question that I'm going to lay out for Dr. White. The other questions I solicited from you guys in advance. If you want to get the advanced ability to ask questions, make sure you join the Black Business School, theblackbusinessschool.com. And sometimes if I have a special guest, I'll let you guys submit the questions in advance. But I hope that you guys were able to gain quite a bit from the discussion. But Ashley has asked this question a couple of times, so I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna drill into this, and we'll answer it by committee. I'll give my 2 cents on it. Ashley says, my father's been in federal prison since I was six months old. I have accepted the responsibility of teaching my parents about finances and credit through my own mistakes. As I am approaching 30 this summer, what advice would you give someone like me carrying the same weight? What do you think, Dr. White? I'm almost feeling like, even though I think it's noble and important to share, whatever she can with her family, sometimes you got relatives that just don't listen to you. I mean, if I teach something to my parents, they got to be receptive to it, because if they're not, if they just see me as like, oh, that's just, my son, it doesn't, so I almost feel like she's carrying a lot of extra weight, maybe a little bit of that guilt that you're talking about. But although I can't, most of us can't relate to what that feels like to have your father been in prison since you're 6 months old, which is, and that's a reflection of just what's challenging in the community, is that you have a lot of trauma that comes from, the mass incarceration epidemic. It's not natural. I mean, everybody talks about, what's happening with the kids being separated at the border from their parents for 2 weeks. Well, there are families like Ashley's where they've been separated for 30 years. So what are your thoughts on Ashley's question? How would you answer that?
I think the first thought that comes to mind is to remember that we best take care of others when we first take care of ourselves. And especially, as a woman, that's not always how we're socialized to be. A lot of times we, take care of others and then we're the last person on the list at the end of the day. But the fact of the matter is, if you take a step back and really think about it, when do you best take care of somebody else? It's when you are your best self, not when you're tired, not when you're depleted. And I think the same thing goes with finances. You got to make sure you're good first and you're solid. And then whatever you can do from there is going to be the best that you can offer your family and your extended support system, then compared to any other situation that you would be in. So, I think first and foremost, I know it's counter. It's counter to what we've learned and what we've been socialized, even especially as women. But the best thing you can do is make yourself stable and take care of your situation first. And I think that's when you'll be able to take best care of those around you.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I would also say, from a more from a really practical standpoint as well, maybe you could offer them, depending on how they like to learn, if it's a matter of just sharing books or just sharing ideas or just having conversations, with them, basic ideas, maybe things that you learn from coming into, to this space. There's a lot that you can teach with very little conversation. You can kind of just say, well, here are 3 things I learned in terms of pillars of wealth. Like, so for example, in the Black Business School, when we break things down, we talk about real estate investing, stock market investing, and business ownership as kind of the 3 ways that people get rich in America, and making sure that your kids know these 3 things. I think also, Ashley, with your father having been incarcerated, just know, the American economic system is not designed to empower previously incarcerated people. So the best advice I would give him is what I give to every Black man I know and every Black woman I know who comes out of prison is, start your own business. You got to, try it, at least consider it, because these jobs, they're all bullshit. Most of them, they just are. Dr. White, I want to say thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I mean, you did so great. You guys don't know, I've known Dr. White, for a while, and I we've been talking about this, and I was, so grateful that she agreed to come in. And it's the first time, she's spoken to a big group like this. And I hope you guys will give her a big digital round of applause, like just some little emojis or some thank yous or something to let her know that that she has added value to your life. And that's one of the things I've always wanted to do, is bring scholars to you. So you don't have to go to like Syracuse and pay $60,000 a year to learn from people like this. You can learn from people like this right here in this space. On Dr. Boyce TV, the home of intelligent Black people. Our goal and our mission in life is we want to spread the gospel of Black economic intelligence throughout the world, and I think we're doing a good job. I don't know if you know, Chris, we reach over 1 million people a week, and so we are kicking ass and taking names, and we're gonna keep kicking more ass, and so everybody who's listening. First of all, I want to ask you also, Dr. White, do you have a place where people can go follow you on social media or anywhere that where they can look you up or anything, or we can save that for next time if you want to?
Well, for right now, yeah, you can find me on Facebook. I think the easiest way to find me too is my name is spelled a little different. It's CRIS, and I'm located in Long Beach, so that might be a way that you'll be easily find me on Facebook. But yeah, I welcome, especially if anybody has any, afterthoughts or questions about that, about what we talked about today. I'm more than happy to address them.
All right. So this is Dr. Chris White. Once again, her PhDs are in. This is so bad. This is so screwed up, right? I know. I was gonna.
Alicia, Dr.
Over here, like backseat driving.
That's right.
Back up, woman. Back up. So her PhDs are in clinical psychology and industrial organization. I keep wanting to say organizational behavior. That's why I always pause when I say industrial organization, because I knew a lot of organizational behavior PhDs, but not any industrial organization. So that's why I keep stopping every time I say that. But anyway, for you guys that are in here, like, share, subscribe to drboycetv.com. If you want to get a text notification when we go live, text the word Boyce to 31996. That's 31996. Just type my name in. Don't forget, we're on iTunes. And also, if you want to join the special seminar Monday night, we're going to talk about how to create a BEEP for your child. That is, BEEPs has 3 E's instead of 2, and it stands for Black Economic and Educational Excellence Package for your child. This includes a plan and a fund that allows your child to avoid the college debt trap, but still go to college if they want to, but also have the skills to pay the bills and a platform on which to execute those skills. So basically, literally, this model, it was created for you by me. You won't find it in any textbook, but I'm qualified to write textbooks. So you're getting something that is specifically designed to solve our specific problem, and I know that it's going to work. So if you'd like to join the seminar, you can go to drboyceseminars.com. That's drboyceseminars.com. I will have PowerPoints and charts and graphs and lay it all out and break it all down so that even a 7-year-old can understand it, and I guarantee you it will change your life. So go to drboyceseminars.com if you'd like to participate. And once again, thank you very much, Dr. White. I appreciate your time very much.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, the honor is all mine. All right, everybody, you guys have a good night. I'm about to go hang out with Dr. Alicia. We about to probably go grab some food or something. So I'll see you guys soon, and have a good night, Dr. White. See you soon.
Have a good night too. Bye, everybody.